Oh, hallelujah, Father in heaven, Yahweh Zebaot. Thank you so much for such an awesome Shabbat we've had and your Ruach HaKadosh with your people. This week, this moment, this conversation, and the hearing, the listening of all of us listening about your words and the study of your words and learning the Yishar of your people. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this opportunity, your Ruach HaKadosh here among us. Oh, hallelujah. Hallelujah. And B'Shem Yahusha, Yahweh Sebaot. Hallelujah. Amen.
Here we are, August 4th, 2024, Gregorian calendar. There was a video made a few years back on the eriktology page. You can find it, I believe, called Poor Keeter. Poor, poor, Keeter, Keeter. After making that video, kind of like a music video, you might say, it seemed like there was absolutely no idea what the heck was going on. And so I made another video, Mountain Air 7, and I think that ended up being hopefully on eriktology also, but where I explained what was going on. And so I asked Ngoods here to look at it, and he had a couple other people looking at it with him. And a moment ago, just asked him, what was your critique? What was the experience, if you could verbalize it? And that has something to do with what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Hosea, book of Hosea, in correlation to the study of Revelation 7 that we've been talking about now for, well, a couple months, I guess it's been. So anyway, Nicholas, you want to turn your camera on? And the question is, what was your reaction, your sense? Where do you go with that?
Well, I was going in there hoping to learn something like really cool and fascinating, and I was like, yeah, let's go. Awesome. But then I was like, all right, I have no idea. Tell me what it's about. So I was like trying really hard to pay attention and listen and focus, and I just couldn't recognize anything that was going on. It was just wrong. It didn't feel good. Felt backwards, upside down, confusing, tilted, swaying, sliding down, dissonant, not right, not in line, not in tune. It didn't make any sense. And I was like, okay, this doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feels almost demonic, if I could put it that way. And by the end of the video, it starts to come back into line, starts to come back into sync, starts to line up in syncopation, in tune. And it's my natural body and, mind was like, okay, it feels right. Feels normal, like home, like it should be. Back in step, back in line, back in sync, back in tune. And I still didn't understand what it meant, but I knew it was right. And I watched your explanation of it, and I said, yes. And then it's exactly what we should be doing. And the other way is exactly what we've been doing. We need to get back in line, get back in step, get back in sync, get back in tune, get back in rhythm and melody and motion. Stop being frozen, going backwards, upside down. So yeah.
How did the other two people that were watching it with you, did they make any comment, or did you have any kind of discussion about it as in terms of a critique or assessment of its experience?
One of my friends, brother, brother, he said it sounded like a horror movie or a thriller movie when, you know, like the camera starts to go, you know, like just like something bad's happening. What the heck? Like just utter confusion, like nothingness. It's just like not good, not right. It's almost like it's just no. No, I don't want to be here. Doesn't feel good. It's confusing. Speechless. Doesn't make any sense. Can't even alien. It's just not from this world. It like no, not good. That's what kind of they're like just a horror movie. The screen's tilting and the suspense of the music just dropping low.
Well, okay, let's run with that. Thank you very much there. So we've been talking about Revelation and kind of hovering over merchefeting. In Genesis, it says the Ruach of Elohim merchefeted al panei ha-mayim, or on the face of the deep, on the face of the waters, merchefet. Mem is a prefix. Rachaf, resh, chet, pei. It's translated a few different ways in Genesis: to flutter, to hover, vibrate. It's an oscillation. It's when you oscillate, when you start moving something, put your hand in the water and you start going like this, it's going to start making ripples. You do that in the air and it's like, I don't see any ripples. Oh, it's generating ripples. In fact, there's an old saying that if a butterfly gently flaps his wings in, say, Florida, will it cause a hurricane in the Philippines? At what point do the ripples that are generated have a seismic effect? So there's that question, the rhetorical proverbial, how many of who has to do what, when, for how long, with what heart? Before what? Before Yahweh will step in and do something, or before the manifest is noticeable? In other words, the manifest is, there's psychological terms, you've got latent and manifest. Latent is something going on, but you just can't see it, or it's suppressed, or it's somehow hidden in your psyche or subconscious. But the manifest is in expression and behavior, something noticeable, calculatable. If a butterfly moves his wings on the other side of the world, how should that have an effect? Because everything has an effect. I've heard it said, think about this. What is light? Well, light is these photons from a source, and let's say the source is the sun, a star, in our realm of experience. The light bounces off of a surface, and then it comes and it hits the retina of an observer. I'll throw this in. I've heard it said, remember back in junior high or something, that if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And it's like, that's an illogical question. Of course it makes a sound. And it's like, why should it even be a question? Does it make a sound? How could anybody think that it doesn't make a sound? It's all dependent on what is the definition of sound. See, I can blow, I can move my hands. Now I just caused a ripple. Did you hear a sound? No. A sound is not what's generated in terms of an oscillation or vibration. It's what's heard by the perceiver. If you say if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound, is only half the question. The setup to the riddle or the question or the physics or the philosophical conundrum is a sound is what is received, not what is generated. Ripples are generated. There's ripples in the water. There's ripples in the air. There's ripples of light. There's ripples of what we would call sound, only because it's perceptible to our ear. If there was somebody there and it's deaf, and they sometimes with waves, especially a concussion wave, like an explosion going off, you can feel it. You can see the effect on other matter. It may not be a sound. As a matter of fact, if the wave is going faster than the speed of sound, which is what, 600 and something miles per hour, which is Mach 1, twice that, Mach 2 would be like 1200, whatever it is, 1200 plus miles an hour. You'll feel or you'll see the flash of lightning before you hear the thunder, because light travels faster than the audio waves are perceptible. But the light waves are coming. So is the light wave sound? It's not perceptible as sound. It's the same thing. It's a frequency being generated, a resonance of wave of some sort. So if you're out in the woods, and here's the specific, there is no sensor by which to receive the sound, hear the sound. Does it generate? Does it make a sound? Generating waves, certainly. Does it make a sound if there's no receiver? It has to be no, because it's a philosophical, logical question. So if light is basically the same thing, and if the perceiver, the retina of somebody's eyeballs, whether it's an animal, a bug, a man, light bounces off of a surface and then comes back, and you could say, well, if you look at a surface which is green, I'm not actually seeing the color of that plant. That plant is not really green, because what's happening is it's absorbing all the other frequencies of color, but it's reflecting the green frequency. And my eye is only perceiving what's reflected, which is what it's not. In a sense, you could say, well, it's actually whatever color it really is holding all the other colors of the spectrum of the rainbow, but it's rejecting the green. And so when I look at it, it looks like green. What's really going on? The question is, hence the dilemma of science. We observe the manifest. And now the question is, how's this really work? What did Elohim build? So the idea is, if light bounces off, well, it bounces against my retina and I see it. And if you were standing over there a ways from me and it bounces off, you're going to see the same thing. Well, not exactly the same thing, because you're at a different angle, and it's going to bounce off, say, a different side of the object being light is reflecting off of. But that light goes on forever. There's nothing to stop the wavelength of light. It goes on. Let's say the universe is infinitely large. Then that same light is still moving, reflecting that. So what's right now, the sun's shining on this landscape, those light waves are going across the universe. But the imagery projected yesterday is also, it's a day ahead, but if you were a jillion miles away, you'd be able to see yesterday. And if you were a jillion miles away, you'd be able to see, let's say, the prehistoric days, dinosaurs walking around in the ferns of the greenhouse. And if you go far enough away to the edge of all matter, that's where the scientists say you should be able to look back and see the original spark moment of creation, because nothing ever stops. So from way out there, far enough away, if it's at infinite space, the theory is you can still see everything that's ever happened still happening. It's almost like it's recorded. And then I've also heard that, I've heard this, and is it true science or not, I'm not sure, but on glass, a pane of glass, every communication, every voice, every sound gets somehow etched, like you're taking a vinyl record and you record music in it, because the vinyl is a degree of softness to get little vibrational scratches in it, which you can replay. Glass, so it's hard like a pane of glass, we think, oh, everything bounces off, but it gets etched into it. And glass is made out of sand, which is rock. And so there's a verse in the Bible that says, if the people keep their voice quiet when they should be crying out, why even the rocks will cry out. And it's like, okay, that's a metaphor. It's like, how do the rocks cry out? Well, in theory, someone could invent a machine, they maybe already have, I couldn't tell you, where they can read what's been inscribed on the sand of the glass, on the stone. And every object, whether it's a hard, resilient surface like a stone or sand or glass, where it can be etched in it. If it's a soft surface, it absorbs it, like absorbing the light and only reflecting some things. And you could say, gosh, everything then that exists is being affected by the waves of whether it's audio or light or whatever other kind of waves are being generated. We're constantly being bombarded. And then if you get things like 5G or radio waves or sonar or things that are invisible to the, you might say, atom's five senses, they're still having an effect. X-rays, for example, will go right through you. Gamma rays, I mean, different types of radioactive. They go right through you, but they'll have an effect. A microwave will have an effect on flesh, though the flesh doesn't necessarily respond in such a way that it can be observable. So everything we say, it's being recorded. Well, it's also being projected. For angels to, I've heard stories that angels have grabbed and are writing down everything we say and do. And it's like, that's kind of creepy. Is that real? I don't know if it's real. I've heard people, I remember hearing a story a long time ago about some lady that she was in a state of bereavement for some reason. It was up in Alaska somewhere. But anyway, there was a knock on the door one day, and there was a guy dressed in a long cloak, and he was standing there, and he had a notepad, and he said, hey, so-and-so, whatever her name was, he says, just so you know, everything's being recorded. And she was like, what? Who are you? Get off my front porch. It was, and as I heard the story told to me, that was an angel. And it was just telling her, reminding her, everything's being recorded. And like I say, that can be a bit creepy or unnerving, I suppose, if you're saying like, I don't want anybody to know what I'm saying or thinking, or, oh, everybody's going to know. Oh, gosh. Really? Well, why should I even have that response of like, oh, because it's the standard human psychology is to feel guilt and shame about being standard human. It's like, why am I thinking these thoughts? Why am I doing these behaviors? Why am I acting like a rebellious teenager or a punk kid doing mischievous? Friend of mine telling me the other day when they were kids, there was a wonderful, huge raspberry patch, and they're like eating raspberries and then a big semi truck. Hey, so they took the raspberries and they threw them against the side of the truck and thought that was a lot of fun until they got caught. And it's like, that was a sin. Why are little children so prone to vandalizing, destroying the raspberries that were otherwise edible? And it's like, they think it's funny. Why? Because Elohim built the human mind at that age to do that. Why? Why are children truant? Because of sin, the devil. That's just the way we're built. Give us something to repent for later. Why was I like that? Why did I have those thoughts? But so too for Adam, for Israel, for you or me or any one of us today to say, I'm going to find the ideal and be that. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to play act. I'm going to be. What's the ideal Adam? Yahusha. He's the role model. He's the iconic archetype, the figurehead, the sailing ships from the well, even the Vikings and the Phoenicians. The Vikings usually had a dragon head on the prow on the front end of their ship going forward. It's like pretty intimidating. Apparently, the Phoenicians had a horse, from what I understand. People could have had different things, some sort of fancy sculpture or some sort of a woman. I think it was called a bowsprit, a bowsprit. The spirit of the ship should be that thing going forward. And you could say, boy, if there was a Christian bowsprit on the ship, the Christian ship, it would be Christ on the cross, the Catholic effigy. Christ crucified, going, woo, pushing forward and blazing the trail, and like what they would call a cow pusher on an old locomotive from the 1800s, clear the track of debris, just push and spread, and that's kind of like the bowsprit. What if there was one of those for our consciousness? What would that be? Is there some kind of a idealized form, an image? Yahweh said, you saw no image, no form, not a male or a female, not a lizard or an animal or a fish or a bird. You heard words. You heard a voice on Mount Sinai. And so my thinking is like, well, then any form, any bowsprit, spirit of pushing things out of the way, is erroneous thinking. But what he gave us was words. So it's like, well, then it's all about the words. That's the Aleph Tav. So how do you turn words into our, Constantine, Emperor Constantine, at one point, he was on record as being a worshiper of a certain deity. We're not even supposed to have the names of the deities come out of our mouth. And it's like, so I can't even tell you. It's written in scripture. It was the Roman sun god. Starts with the letter M. Anyway, the point is, he was a follower, worshiper, and adherent of that philosophy, that mind, that heart. And it wasn't until he was on his deathbed that he was actually, from what I understand, baptized, converted to, at least manifestly converted to Christianity, even though he had made Christianity the state religion a few years earlier. He had basically hosted the Council of Nicaea, Nicaean ecumenical, the first of 7 great ecumenical councils, which is like all the perspectives of belief coming in unison. He had been given this vision. He was about to engage in a battle, and he had pictured this red cross in the sky, and he heard this voice. He was told, in this sign, conquer. So that next day, before the going into battle, he had all his soldiers paint a big red cross on their shields and on their, helmets, and that became their symbol. And they were actually successful, and that became the sign of the Crusader armies, the Christian armies throughout what we know as the Middle Ages. It's like, yeah, onward Christian soldiers, and it's like, are we supposed to do something like that? The Christian flag, a white flag, a blue corner, and a red cross. Well, the interesting thing about the cross is that the Romans crucified people on it as a form of execution, but the cross is actually a symbol of the sun god, in the sense that, look at the shape of the cross. You've got the shortest piece on top, that's like the winter solstice, the longest piece on the bottom, the longest day, the summer solstice, and the 2 days of equality, those are the spring and autumn, the vernal and autumnal equinoxes. And so you'll see Celtic crosses in a graveyard, and it's like, hey, look, they're Christian. No, they were sun worshipers. That's why the cross was used in all these other peoples and religions. And it's like, well, gosh, what should be, whoever we is, us, what would be our symbol of who are we? What do we believe? And who do we look to? Gosh, we ought to have some sort of insignia. That would be cool. How about a menorah? That looks too Jewish. Why does it look Jewish? Well, it's there in Exodus 25. See, it was Yahweh himself telling Moshe, this is how you build the menorah. And he had this fellow named Bezalel. Oholiab was his second, his right-hand man. Kind of like Yogi and Boo Boo, you know, the two Hanna-Barbera's bear cartoon. Anyway, Bezalel and Oholiab, and they built, Yahweh had given these men the skill, the talent to work metals and wood and fabrics and design and engineering and put this whole thing together. So the menorah is actually not a Jewish design, it's Yahuwah's design. And some people say, well, the Star of David, that's Jewish. It's like, oh no, that's the Star of Tammuz, and that's occultic. And it's like, let me just say something about the Star of David. In paleo, the letter, here's a, see that triangle there? That's the D, the Dalet, the fourth letter. David's name is 3 letters. Sometimes it's written with 4, but it's Dalet, Vav, Dalet. The Vav as a word is typically translated and. The pictograph is a connector. So whether the connector is a nail, a hook, some kind of bridge, some kind of a linkage, a coupling device, that's Vav. So literally David's name is Dalet connected to Dalet. Dalet, Vav, Dalet. Vav means connected to. If you were to take 2 triangles, the paleo letters, and superimpose them, you could have a smaller one and a bigger one, but it's a pretty simple logic to take 2 triangles and stick one on top of the other and say, there's graphically 2 triangles attached to each other. That's David. So for somebody to say, hey, I think that 6-pointed star is the Star of David, and whether it's interwoven or just, personally, I don't have any dog in that fight. I don't care. To me, that's just David. So if somebody says that's the Star of David, okay. And if somebody else says, no, that's the star of some Canaanite false god, some devil, some occultist, some Kabbalah, it's like anything can mean anything to anybody. And just because somebody else grabs an idea and runs with it doesn't mean that's what it is. That doesn't mean that's where it started. And somebody could say, yeah, but there's proof that Tammuz was using the 6-pointed star. I don't care. That's 2 triangles attached to each other. Dalet, Vav, Dalet. David. If that's the Star of David, if that's Solomon's seal, if people use it for magic and blah, blah, I don't care. They use the 5-pointed star. They use the 7-pointed star. They'll use everything they can. And if you find something you like, we're going to grab the rainbow. Dang, I can't use the rainbow anymore. Well, Yahuwah uses the rainbow. He invented the rainbow. The rainbow apparently had never appeared until after Noah's flood. Noah ark, it wasn't his flood. He built the ark, and then there was the flood. Yeah, but the rainbow is just physics, man. That's sunlight through water vapor, and you got a rainbow. What do you mean there was no rainbow before the flood? Well, apparently, some people say there was this thing called the canopy. And when I was in grade school, there's a geologist at our church, and he told us about this thing. Back in those days, that was in the 1960s, he was saying back in those days that the earth was a globe, but back in the days before the flood, there was another, call it a concentric sphere, another globe-like ice around the entire earth, so that the earth itself as a nugget in the center would be like in a greenhouse. And because of this shielding effect, the sun rays and anything else coming would be filtered through this ice that was maybe 3 feet thick. And that was this thing called the rakia, the firmament, but he didn't even really go into that, but he was just talking, this was called the canopy theory to some geologists. Many, many years later, I heard other people talk about the canopy theory, but most people have never even heard of it. But my point is, Well, then the condition of the earth, while it was within this canopy, well, there's water vapor, yeah, but the sunlight going through the canopy of ice is going to behave differently to the observer on the face of the earth. It's not going to see the rainbow in the same way. There might be rainbows, there might be iridescent refraction, but so what event happened at the flood? Well, it just God made it rain. Well, no, what happened is Yahuwah, the Elohim of creation, had built the world and the universe in such a way that something radically changed. Some people say, let's imagine a comet, an asteroid from outer space somewhere comes crashing through this ice shield, breaking it into pieces. It falls to the earth. So now there's all this ice immediately crushing, collapsing onto the surface of the earth, which would provide a lot more water, but it also would account for the ice age being simultaneous with or right after Noah's flood. Where does all that ice go? And then this asteroid punctured through the terra firma, the surface of the terrestrial land mass, puncturing it, breaking it, sending cracks in it, so the water underneath, as the landmass started to sink, the water would shoot up, throwing debris up into the sky, which also rained down. And so within a matter of hours, minutes, hours, days, the entire world is flooded. All the landmass sinks, and then the landmass gets back up to the surface. Continents that we now know broken apart, moved. Carl Baugh, B-A-U-G-H, Creation Research. CSR, anyway, Glen Rose, Texas. He was talking about all this many years ago. What I'm saying, there's these different theories. So we can look around and what we see now is something completely different. And we might say, well, what did people live like years ago? It's like, it was all different before the flood. What about the cities? Are they the cities that we still find under the water? Or are they things that we find in the mountains? I saw something, it's happened more than once, but recently watching a documentary about some history. There was a fabled grand city, I think it was maybe in Central America, giant temple, and the Spanish conquistadors were coming. Cortez, I think, was the guy. He had taken out the Aztecs. But the point is, this one particular city, all of a sudden, I guess what people figured happened, the people started burying their sun god temple in dirt. By the time Cortez got there, there's no temple. Where's the city? And since then, that was in is it the 1500s? Anyway, it's overgrown with trees, with huge trunks. I mean, hundreds of years of growth. And then recently, because of our technology, somebody can go back and say, hey, there's a structure underneath there. And so not only have they dug out and have found the entire stone temple, but also then you go inside and they find other artifacts, and it's like just incredible archaeological discoveries these days. It's like, why didn't anybody know? Why didn't anybody remember? What God were those people worshiping? What culture were they experiencing, only to be completely lost? Where's the reality? Anything we can figure with science, a few decades later, somebody else says, no, that's not the way it works. So Newtonian physics was replaced with Einstein, and Einstein's physics is being replaced with quantum theory. And some people say, quantum theory is all conjecture and it doesn't make any sense anyway. And that's not really what it is. And then you got this electric universe group that says there's no such thing as gravity. So there's a whole different thing going on. And it's like, how does anybody know what's going on? I'm just trying to blend a little bit of science with things that I find interesting here. What's that got to do with Revelation 7? What's that got to do with the book of Hosea? We live here. I think we live. What does live mean? What does any word mean? Just so you know, I heard a story the other day. And this plays into the consciousness of what do words mean and who runs the meaning of words in what arena. So you go to a basketball court, the referee making sure everything's played and the people are playing on the court have certain rules. The people in the stands aren't by those rules. They just have to stay off the court. So tennis court, the same thing, football field, baseball arena. But you go to a court of law and it's the same thing. It's a sort of a game, the certain people meaning of words. And somebody said a case was being prosecuted and the judge said to the defendant, what was it? Did you suffer? That was the word. And the guy says, yes, by golly, I did suffer. And as a matter of fact, I'm still suffering. I find it to be quite disturbing and painful. And the judge said, no, listen to me. I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you suffer? And the guy said, yes, I did. Let me be on record as saying I did suffer. I am suffering. The guy lost the case. It's like, what the heck? Well, he goes and looks in either Black's or Bouvier's, I think it's called Dictionary of Law Words. And guess what? The word to suffer means to do something volitionally. No, the word suffer means I'm in pain and it hurts. No, according to the Law Dictionary, the word suffer means to do something volitionally. So when the judge asked this guy twice, did you suffer? He basically said, yes, I experienced this torment volitionally on my own prerogative. Now, he didn't know he was saying that, but Dad blasted right there in the court of law. He's on record. And because that's the meaning of words that they use on that court. If it was a tennis ball court, if it was a basketball court, if it was any other situation, maybe that word would be different. But in that court of law, the meaning of the word suffer means you did it on purpose. So when I see in the King James English where Hosea says, suffer the little children to come to me. And it's like, suffer the little children. You have to, those old English, what do they know? We got different meaning of the word. So allow the little children to come to me. Well, if you allow something, then you can't prosecute somebody else for doing it to you against your will. The word suffer is exactly the opposite. Oh. So the question is, what are the rules? How does this universe work? Science will hopefully figure it out and tell us. What's the true history? Well, maybe the historians will figure it out. Oh no, there's a certain word. They found it in Turkey. It's not gigliotempe, but something like that. There's this place that they found, and they're starting to unearth it. They unearthed like 5%, and then they just buried it in concrete and put a visitor center there, so they won't. Can't remember the phrase, the meaning of the word. Anyway, the point is, some people don't want us to find ancient artifacts and connect them to pre-flood history or even after the flood. How did the Sumerians worship their god they called Anunnaki? The Anunnaki. Are those space guys? Well, hey, why would I mention that name? Because the word Aleph, Nun, Kaf, Yod, there's no Vav in there, but it's pronounced Anki or Anoki. That's the same name as a pagan deity, Sumerian deity from the ancient or from Persia, perhaps. Yeah, but I've heard people say that Yahweh, Yod, He, Vav, He, those 4 Hebrew letters were the name of some ancient god. Canaanite deity. It's all pagan. You got to throw it away. So you got to throw away the 6-pointed star. You got to throw away the cross. You got to throw away the word Anoki or Anki. You got to throw away the name Yahweh. It's like, where do you find the pure? Well, see, any deviation, any perverted twisting can happen for anything pure. So just because some pervert has intentionally perverted it just to mock, or whether some well-intentioned worshiper gets the inclination by some spirit, whether he thinks it's the Holy Spirit or whether it was an evil spirit who twists and turns it into something opposite of what it should be, I can't base what I believe on any of those things. How do I find the pure truth? So going back to Revelation 7:14, this group of people of every kindred, nation, tongue, they are saying salvation belongs to our Elohim. Well, salvation only belongs to one Elohim, and it can be found in Hosea. We'll bump into that. Yahweh claims to be the Savior, the only Elohim, the one and only. Therefore, if we see a group in the book of Revelation, chapter 7, and they're clothed in white robes that they made white in the blood of the Lamb, well, it must be metaphorical because blood is red and it stains, but this is a supernatural chemical reaction with the white linen or the filthy linen of somehow turns it white. Well, it could be a strange chemical reaction. What do I know? But the blood of the Lamb, what remember we read in the there's the Hebrew Revelation, and then there's this Aramaic AENT by Andrew Gabriel Roth, and that says that you could read the words, made them white in the blood of the Lamb, explained and made clear in the likeness of what he said. When we behave like what Yahweh said, because of clear explanation. And how do you get clear explanation? Look at what he said and figure out what the words are. Well, if I wasn't in the process of trying to look at his words and making clear what he said, I would never have seen that that's what he said. In the Aramaic with Hebrew letters. And anybody else could say, It's like, whatever. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That was a suggestion. I believe it was Paul made that. But this is really serious stuff. And the question is, how does anybody know what's going on? Well, nobody has any clue what's going on. If Constantine, who became a saint, it's Saint Constantine, and even his mother, the name is Helena. She's a saint too. Orthodox faith, Christian Orthodox Church. If he can construct something like the Nicene Creed or promote that, and it turns into this whole other thing, which is contradictory to what Yahweh said, hence you get a different religion that the Jews can't recognize, Christianity versus Judaism. Does it mean the Jews are necessarily wrong if they don't agree with what Saint Constantine proposed, or is it that Constantine is not a saint of the holy God? He's a saint of the unholy devil. See, as soon as you start putting labels and words, everything just goes berserk. What we've inherited is that there's a story that says at the beginning it was pristine, it was true. Do you know what solfeggio tones are? Well, the solfeggio tones were rediscovered by a guy named, his name escapes me, Joseph Puleo. And he wrote a book that was published by Len Horowitz, tetrahedron.org publishing, but healing codes for the coming apocalypse. Healing codes. So Joseph Puleo had a couple angel visits that he talks about, which are spurious, questionable, and it's like, geez, you don't want to promote that stuff, do you? Anyway, he had a couple angel visits. He had a couple events where he saw, given to him, displayed to him, the science of the solfeggio tones, which are pure healing tones, healing for physical, for mental, for... It's like the cymatic geometry of the purest tone. There's 9 tones. I think it was 6 of them were given, and then the other 3 were calculated because it's just a formula. 9 tones. 528 is the purest, restorative, regenerative, the sense you get feeling when you're in love, that's 528. The color of new growth green, that's 528. A vibrational hertz calculation of frequency. So what? Well, that's just the way this place is built. Happens to be 528. Okay, well, it forms this cymatic pattern, and guess what? As we talked a few weeks, those stained glass windows are actually patterns of cymatic geometry found in those cathedrals, and they have an effective healing. So there's a theory that those ancient cathedrals were not built as churches. They became used later as churches because people would go in there and they'd hear these sounds and they'd become restored, and then they'd go back to work. But who built those cathedrals? Well, Tartarians or somebody who knew about this stuff built them, and then other people said, we forget who those guys are, so let's just say a great-grandpa, he built it. He worked for 100 years with some other guys building these great buildings. And it's like, so the history's lost. But the whole idea that there's a truth and that the solfeggio tones are pure tones of pure truth that we don't even know anything about because they changed the scale from a 6-note scale to a 7-note scale. The return to the first note is an octave, which is 8, like octopus, 8. But it's a 7-note scale. But the solfeggio was 6. Like I say, the other 3 are just calculated. What does that all mean? So in the Poor Keter video, start off with all 9 solfeggio tone notes playing like as if the wind was hitting a wind chime, as if the Ruach was playing these beautiful notes, like kind of in the Garden of Eden. And Adam was told to do something, and then there was another voice. And Adam and Hua decided to listen to Shema, which means Shema isn't hear or listen, like hearing the wind tone, wind chime note. To Shema is to hear, believe it, and thus behave or do according to what you believe that was what you heard. So instead of believing the voice of Elohim, they listened to an alternative, a contradiction voice of the serpent, the Nachash, which is also, Nachash means copper, shiny, and enchantment. The enchanted forest, the enchanted village, the magical kingdom. Hey, like Disneyland, that word, magic, enchantment, bewilder, that all those are words describing mesmerizing, the shiny. And when I say that like this, is that the word for the claws had copper claws in the 4th beast of Daniel chapter 7. Iron teeth, copper claws, chewed up Shana's teeth, which means to change or vary. This monster, this dragon-like monster, changed the meaning of words, possibly the spelling of words, maybe threw some vowels in. And then copper claws, the word claws is taper, but it's like the word copper means, it's the same word as nachash, and it means to enchant. So somehow there's this beguiling seduction, this enchantment, like, wow, shiny and kind of beautiful. And what did Yahweh say? Yeah, but bacon tastes so good. Pork is like the best food on the planet. But he said, don't eat it. So it starts off, that video, in the visual is just wheat gently blowing in the wind. That's all. Just wheat. It's like the earth is a wheat field, and amongst the wheat that was planted by the farmer, an enemy came and sowed tares. It's just a metaphor. Well, how do we recover? Go back to what Yahweh said. Well, Adam and Hua, they had to recover by, oh, that's right. Instead of being in the garden eating fruit, they were kicked out. And remember, it says they go back to the land from whence he was taken. So you got to picture they were in Eden, but there's a garden in Eden. So you picture the Mishkan pattern. Well, there's a fenced area. Call that Eden. Outside the fenced area, well, that's the land of Nod. Remember, after Cain got in trouble, he was sent to the land of Nod. Like in English, if you fall asleep and you just, it's called nodding off. You go off into this wandering land of dreams where you're no longer conscious and attentive. That's nodding off. So Cain is banished to the land of Nod outside of Eden. So here's another place of the Mishkan pattern, is that the big fence around the Mishkan is like, this is the land of Eden, and outside in the darkness is the land of Nod, but there's a garden in Eden. Well, that's the covered place, in which is the menorah, table of showbread, altar of incense, and then the most sacred place is behind the veil is the Ark of the Covenant. Well, in the land of Eden, Adam was taken from the ground, and then he was put into the garden in the covered place. And after he was banished from the garden, he went back to Eden, to the land that he was taken from, and told to till the land. Well, when you till the ground, cutting with a plow back and forth or with a hoe, that looks like the barbecue grill. Inside the fence, but at the barbecue grill. And then there's this pool of water. Well, there's a headwaters of 4 rivers that water the earth. So that's like the laver. And then there's the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, the most sacred place, so I could say, well, that's like the Ark of the Covenant, is the tree of life. But then there's the tree that he was told, don't eat this. But they were supposed to have just this fellowship of eating whatever they wanted, eating the fruit off of the trees, except for that one tree. That's kind of like the menorah, is this tree shape, and the ayin, the stomach of the tree, the ayin, the fruit, the pei, the mouth, and they were just allowed to eat and eat whatever, but they were kicked out of there, and they had to go now eat what they plowed with by the sweat of their brow. So I can see this pattern of the Mishkan in the Garden of Eden story. So I'm taking the story, and then I'm taking the pattern, and instead of saying, well, there's completely different things, I'm saying, what if I take this pattern, how can I lay it on top of the story and give me a different reference as to what's going on in the story? Because I would have never thought of the Mishkan pattern or the Moedim or the letters of the alphabet with the Garden of Eden. What's one got to do with the other? It's a way of thinking. It's a frame of mind. It's a reference, a gauge, a calipers, tape measure, plumb level. It's a way to take this idea of what did Yahuwah say, what did he give his people, and hold it up as a reference to anything else. So I'm not going to worry about ancient history or how other people worshiped their gods. I'm not going to look at that part of archaeology. I'm going to look at the part of archaeology of where Israel went stupid. Well, they went, it's the book of Hosea, which we'll talk about in the next hour here, talks about that. And the recovery, well, that's worth noting because that has to do with us, but everything else is just water under the bridge, as they say, metaphorically. It's just happened, and I don't need to put my time and attention. It's curious. Historically, I might go to a museum and go, look at that, But he said, don't even copy, don't look at, don't even dwell on all the pagan, heathen, Elohim, Achrim, gods of others, areas where everybody else went errant and wayward, and so their enemies took over. And whether their enemies were genetic mutations or space aliens or demons or monsters, I don't know what they are, but there's weird looking bones out there. I don't need to wrap my consciousness around that. It's fascinating, it's disturbing, it's enchanting, but it's like, whoa, how do I have a heart of finding Yahuwah's words alluring, seductive? He did say he was going to bring his people into the wilderness and seduce them, seduce their heart with his words. Well, if Yahweh said he's going to do that, then somehow I have to choose, I can choose to be seduced by his words, or I can choose to be seduced by the words of the shining Nachash, voice of the serpent. In other words, he put within Adam the right to determine for himself what he will find fascinating. alluring, seductive. And those are the words Yahweh uses for the words of the enemy as compared to his words. They're not just some, well, what we might call a sexual thing. It's grab your attention and be fascinated by. And if I can allow that to happen or cause that to happen, I can choose to be interested, fascinated, enthralled, zealous for. See, all those are these proactive words, Yahweh's stuff. So when he says the word Shema, hear. Okay, did you hear me? What? Pay attention, but to believe and then to do, I could say wrapped up in this word Shema is you can choose to be fascinated by, capture the word fascinate has something to do with like the word fantasy and phantasm and fiction and imagination. I can choose to be, I can choose to imagine Yahweh's words true. I can choose to, what if what Yahweh said was so true, it's everything it was cracked up to be, then my act of being fascinated, my act of paying attention generates waves of resonance. As we said before, your eyeballs don't just receive incoming, they also project outgoing, which means what I look at, if it was sensitive enough, could be aware that they were being looked at. They, it, the thing, whatever that is. And if Yahweh's words are life and they generate life, this whole idea of what if truth knew you were looking at it? What if you knew you were being looked at by truth? And it actually not only is you caught it looking at you, but it say, what? It winked at you like, what? Truth is looking at me. Truth is aware that I am looking for truth. Does truth have some kind of consciousness? Well, maybe that's Elohim's consciousness within this thing called truth, or maybe it's almost like that woman's spirit of wisdom, Chakma. I've heard people say that Chakma is actually some sort of a female consort of Yahweh that he has a relationship with, or some sort of a maternal deity figure. Queen of Heaven, is it Mary or is it Chakma? But let's just pretend that truth has a beingness, a life, an eternal consciousness as truth. Is it the angel of truth? Well, there's demons of lies, and we don't know what's going on. They're just fantasy words we do. But if we could imagine that there's this life energy which can actually engage eyeball to eyeball with you and know your heart, do you care? Are you listening? Do you want to listen? What would you recognize? We're going to have to take a break here. We're at over an hour. And then we'll get into Hosea. So, in fact, gosh, I got to run downstairs real quick too.